Good afternoon or evening to everyone. Note said it was going to be in Hebrew, but I hope it's okay that I'm going to speak in English. So as you can see, no conflicts of interest. Okay, so as you already know, non-invasive assessment of left ventricular diastolic function is typically performed through echo. But interpretation of results is complex and imperfect. So recently, two methods utilizing cardiac CT have been published. The first is the echo-based method, which simulates echocardiographic parameters from CT. And the second is the volume method, which analyzes left atrial and left ventricular volume changes. This method was studied and published by our lab. The aim of our study was to validate and compare the two methods in a consecutive group of patients and determine which parameters best distinguish normal from abnormal diastolic function using echo Doppler as the reference standard. So we selected 128 patients who had undergone a full cardiac CT and a full echo exam. We excluded patients with more than 1 month between the exam, patients with significant diseases, and we ended up with 77 patients who qualified for the study. We then took those patients and divided them into normal, abnormal, and indeterminate diastolic function. The evaluation was based on the new AAC guidelines using echo Doppler as a reference standard. The first method, the echo-based method, mimics echo Doppler methods in evaluating E over E prime and E over A in evaluating diastolic function. E is the maximum early inflow rate. I don't know if I can. We basically took, in calculating E, we used the maximum upslope in early diastole, and in a similar manner we took the maximum upslope for A, and we were able to calculate E over A, which gave us a comparable parameter to echo. We also calculated E prime. To do that, manual measurements of lateral and medial ventricular wall lengths from the annulus to the apex were taken, and E prime was defined as the maximum change in length over time. For the second method, the volume method, left ventricular and left atrial volumes were measured every 5% of the RR interval using semi-automatic software. End diastole, end systole, and mid diastole were identified. From these volumes, systolic, early diastolic, and end diastolic volume changes were calculated. We were also able to look at specific atrial parameters to see which best distinguished normal from abnormal diastolic function. So specifically, we looked at left atrial end diastolic volume, left atrial early emptying volume, left atrial late emptying volume, and left atrial total emptying fraction. Left atrial total emptying fraction is comparable to left ventricular ejection fraction and is a good parameter of global atrial function. The following slide depicts the results of the echo-based method. As you can see, E over E prime and E prime are the optical parameters for distinguishing normal from abnormal diastolic function. Under ROC analysis, the areas under the curve were 0.78 and 0.79 respectively. It's important to note that our values differ to those of echo because we evaluated E flow as opposed to E velocity. By estimating the mitral valve area as 4 centimeters squared and dividing E flow by that number, we obtained E velocity, a comparable value to echo. This slide depicts the results of the volume method. Left atrial total emptying fraction and left atrial end diastolic volumes were the optical parameters in distinguishing normal from abnormal diastolic function, and they had areas under the curve of 0.83 and 0.85 respectively. When comparing the two methods, they were not significantly different, but we can note that left atrial end diastolic volume tended to have the highest area under the curve. In conclusion, both of the methods can differentiate between normal and abnormal diastolic function relative to echocardiography, but the volume method proved to be more time efficient and tended to be more accurate than the echo-based technique. Thank you for listening.